idea that the system we have is incredibly efficient.
This moment to revere him.
I would choose this moment because most of what is said about Vladimir Putin in the mainstream press by talking heads like yourself is just factually not true, just like everything that people like you said about COVID.
Bam!
In your face.
In your face!
If your hair wasn't so good, I'd have him cut you off.
Ah. I think Pierce got lost in his hair, and he didn't even hear him say that.
Pierce, he's the cognitive dissonance of that beautiful hair and having it take.
Just like you were wrong on COVID, you're just as wrong on Ukraine, you stupid establishment tool. Here we go.
The fact of the matter is, this war that everyone talks about, that so-called started on February 24, 2022, actually began in 2014 after the U.S. led a violent coup on the Ukrainian government that was democratically elected. When people, specifically ethnic Russians in the Donbass, decided that they didn't want a U.S.-installed puppet government filled with Nazis, they vocalized their opinions. And for that, they were met with violence and aggression by the Ukrainian government, who slaughtered them for 8 years. 15,000 people died in this fighting while Putin tried to achieve peace through the Minsk Accords and the Minsk II Accords, all of which ended up being rejected by the Ukrainian government at the behest of Germany and the United States. The Ukrainian government continued to push forward despite the fact that Putin wanted peace, and they said that they wanted to join NATO. They said they wanted to have nukes right on Russia's border. And because of that, Putin stepped in and said, hey, look, we're going to stop the bloodshed. We're going to stop the NATO escalation. We're going to stop the risk of potentially this unfolding into a full-fledged nuclear war. And we're going to do what needs to be done. We're going to liberate the ethnic Russians in Ukraine. We're going to de-NATO-fy Ukraine, and we're going to de-Nazify Ukraine.
All right, I've given you a good chance to answer that.
Oh my God, Piers!
I was surprised that Piers let him go on that
his
long.
Dick was so hard he couldn't think.
All the blood has gone from his brain to his dick.
That's my theory. Piers' dick was so hard. Wait, I'm back.
Hang on.
Get out of here!
Come on, you crazy kid. Watch what he says.
Gotta say, a lot of that I thought was a crock of crap. Genuine.
A lot of that was a crock of crap. He won't say what. He never says what. A lot of that was a crock of crap.
Which parts?
Which parts?
Or is he doesn't say in his pants right now after that beautiful Jackson monologue?
The connection went down, so there's no conspiracy. We weren't trying to silence you. Look, I just find it odd. I mean, for argument's sake, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, did you feel that he was a peace-loving guy that we should be distinct?
But you notice he didn't say. Remember when? But you notice he didn't say. Remember when George Bush invaded Iraq? He doesn't bring that up.
It's crazy.
It's amazing.
It's crazy to bring up Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein from 1991.
I would have thought
he's talking about 1991. Kurt.
Yeah, like you know, my amateur response, but at the first part of the question, I would bring up the U.S. and Iraq. Like, yes. Somebody go, that's the past. He actually went further back.
He went a decade further back.
Which, by the way, they were drinking Saddam's milkshake. If you ever saw There Will Be Blood, slant drilling.
Yes, right. Here we go.
The supporting, or did you agree with American conservatives then that what should actually happen is Desert Storm and General Schwarzkopf should be leading the American charge to repel him?
So I don't know. So Pierce thinks this is a good argument, like a gotcha. Oh. Hey, what, you can't say you were against us taking care outside of Hussein in Kuwait. Yeah, 10 years later it was around, but that before. So watch what he says.
If you felt the latter, why would you feel differently about someone like Putin doing this in Ukraine?
Well, I don't know if you know, Pierce, I'm only 23 years old, so I didn't have fully fledged opinions on that at the time. But what I think is very interesting is for all the Western officials that are so outraged over what Putin is doing in Ukraine, why were they not outraged over what NATO did to Yugoslavia or what NATO did to Libya or what the United States did in Iraq and Afghanistan or Syria? The United States drone operation program in Africa had a 95% civilian death rate. For everyone to be so up in arms over Putin liberating these ethnic Russians in Ukraine from Nazis, it is just, yeah, I have no...
Listen, Jackson, the trouble is, some of the stuff you said in your initial response is historically defensible. You can argue from 2014 there's been this issue there. I get that. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But when you say that Putin's only game here is to go and liberate the Ukrainians from Nazis, you just sound completely bonkers.
That's it. That's his whole argument is crock of crap and you sound bunkers. That's his whole argument. Oh, and then he had that stupid thing about Saddam Hussein and Kuwait. These are his arguments.
Look what it says under there. Most censored man on YouTube accused of being former socialist.
All right, here we go.
Not to say there aren't some far-right people with Nazi tendencies in Ukraine. There are, as there are in many countries. But the idea this is a Nazi-run country when the president is Jewish, never mind anything else, is laughably ridiculous.
Well, just because he's Jewish doesn't mean he's not sicking his Azov Nazi thugs on ethnic Russians in the Donbass.
You think a Jewish president is going to be actively promoting Nazism? That's your position.
The ones with swastika tattoos and Hitler tattoos in Mariupol.
You know what, Joe?
What I'll say, Pierce, one question. What I'll say is, if you're so outraged over the atrocities allegedly of Putin in Ukraine and all these Ukrainians that have been killed, and you tweet about it nonstop, why did you not tweet once about the atrocities that were perpetrated by the Ukrainian government from 2014 to 2022 against those ethnic Russians in the Donbass?
Well, yeah, Cosmic.
Well, my family.
He had no answer. So he throws it to this guy, the host of Trigger Pod.
Yeah. What happened?
Een wereld van vrijheid van meningsuiting? Want zijn we werkelijk vrij om onze mening te uiten?
Nou, Kajsa Ollongren die heeft gewoon letterlijk gezegd dat ze vond dat desinformatie bestreden moet worden. En dat er een ministerie van waarheid zo ongeveer moet komen. Dat inderdaad actief gaat bestrijden. En tijdens de coronaperiode werd het ook gedaan. Ik heb een proces gevoerd tegen YouTube. Ik heb een proces gevoerd tegen LinkedIn.
En Mark Zuckerberg heeft het ook deze week gedeeld. Hè? Dat ze van de Amerikaanse staat een bepaalde visie moesten pushen.
Ja, Elon Musk was natuurlijk een echte dappere strijder. Die heeft meteen gezegd, er waren gewoon perverse banden tussen de overheid en Twitter. En toen hij eigenaar werd van Twitter, heeft hij dat geëxposed. Mm-hmm. En Mark Zuckerberg, ja, die heeft nu na 3 jaar, komt hij opeens in het verzet. Mm-hmm. Ja, ik denk dat het een beetje pervers is. Ik denk dat het hoopgevend is. Ik denk dat hij merkt in zijn following, zijn achterban, dat mensen er wel een beetje klaar mee zijn. En dat het te ver gaat. En dat hij daarom denkt van, ik moet nu die draai maken. Want de overheid, dat is niet meer een gegarandeerde vriend. Mm-hmm. Of niet meer, misschien als Trump wint, dan ja, dan gaat er toch wel wat veranderen.
Maar aan de andere kant zien we ook dat bijvoorbeeld Elon Musk met Twitter of X tegenwoordig uitspreekt van joh, de Europese Unie is naar ons toegekomen. Die heeft ons geprobeerd om te kopen als het ware. En andere partijen, zoals inderdaad een Meta, Facebook, Instagram, allemaal één pot nat natuurlijk, die hebben dat wel gedaan. Dus in hoeverre is dat dan de waarheid? Want daar hoor je dan weer niks over, toch?
Ja, we zullen het nooit weten, maar we weten wel dat we in een soort Orwelliaanse wereld terecht zijn gekomen waarbij de overheid probeert te dicteren wat de waarheid is. En dat is hun waarheid en dat is niet onze waarheid. En ja, sterker nog, de overheid kan niks. De overheid is je grootste vijand. De overheid is vaak uit de hand gelopen. De overheid is
in teams en op de werkvloer ook polariseert. Dat mensen bijvoorbeeld, ik denk meest recent, over Israël en Gaza. Dat heeft echt veel reuring op de werkvloer veroorzaakt. En het interessante daaraan is dat het kan allebei waar zijn. Hè? En wat Hamas heeft gedaan is afschuwelijk. En wat Israël doet is afschuwelijk. En toch voelen mensen de neiging dat ze altijd moeten kiezen voor het een of het ander. En daar hun gelijk over moeten halen. En dat maakt dat er ook...
En dat wordt dan door desinformatie ook nog eens aangezet.
Absoluut. Ja,
want er worden beelden gedeeld op platforms.
In de eerste maand na de aanslag van Hamas heeft Israël meer dan $1 miljoen gestoken in een campagne die zegt: als je kritisch bent op Israël, ben je antisemitisch. En dat zie je vervolgens ook overal terugkomen. En dat is niet misschien een typische vorm van desinformatie, maar dat is wel hoe staten
omgaan met publieke opinie.
Ja, absoluut. Ja.
Vandaag doen we dat met Frans Ozinga, hoogleraar oorlogsstudies aan de Universiteit Leiden. Goedemiddag.
Goedemiddag.
Laten we beginnen met het laatste nieuws. Premier Dick Schoof heeft vandaag een verrassingsbezoek aan Oekraïne gebracht. Samen met president Zelensky was hij in Zaporizhia, bekend van die grote kerncentrale en vlakbij het front. En hij zei daar dat Oekraïne kan rekenen op de blijvende steun van Nederland. Nou, er is bij deze nieuwe coalitie ook wel eens getwijfeld of ze wel 100% achter Oekraïne zouden blijven staan. Want de PVV liet heel kort geleden nog echt iets anders horen. Is met dat bezoek vandaag die sceptisch een beetje weggenomen?
Ja, ik denk het wel. Het begon natuurlijk al met het regeerakkoord. Dat voor de coalitiepartijen echt een voorwaarde was dat Nederland het beleid zou voortzetten van de vorige regering.
Demonstraties in Israël na de brute executie van 6 gijzelaars door Hamas. Israëliërs zijn woedend op premier Netanyahu omdat er maar geen deal komt met Hamas. Ik praat erover door met correspondent Ralf Dekkers. Die is in Tel Aviv. Vooral, hoe is de situatie bij jou allereerst?
Gisteravond was het druk op straat. 500.000 mensen, 500.000. Dat hebben we nog niet gezien sinds 7 oktober. Nu is het vooralsnog rustig. Er zijn kleine groepen die de straat op gaan en strategische plekken proberen te blokkeren. Verkeerspleinen, bruggen. En er is al verschillende malen tot een harde confrontatie met de politie gekomen. Maar later op de dag, als de zon wat verder weggaat en het wat koeler wordt, dan zullen er weer hele grote demonstraties plaatsvinden hier in Tel Aviv, maar ook in Jeruzalem.
En het zijn demonstraties die breed gedragen worden en vanuit verschillende organisaties in het land komen, hè?
Het wordt breed gedragen, maar lang niet door iedereen. Er zijn nu ook protesten in Jeruzalem, bijvoorbeeld voor het kantoor voor het huis van Benjamin Netanyahu, want van tegenstanders van de algemene staking die de vakbond hier heeft afgekondigd. Zij vinden van als we zo'n stap nemen, ja, dan luisteren we eigenlijk naar Hamas. We knielen voor Hamas.
Interview, the big day, the big moment on CNN. Kamala Harris finally emerged from hiding with her emotional support dog, her golden retriever, Tim Walz, and they sat down for an interview. It's the first time she's answered any questions since wrestling the nomination away from the cucumber, who is technically still president right now. And as expected, the interview did not go well. It didn't go well, and it kind of proved why she hadn't done any interviews until that point. And it also proves why, strategically, they should have just stayed the course and not done any interviews. I mean, she could have probably gotten away with not doing any interviews until the election. She could have gotten away with it, and it was a tactical mistake to sit down for this interview, because the moment she sits down and starts speaking off the cuff, it's just the hype bubble that has been surrounding her for the last month is punctured, and that's what we saw. So we'll start with this clip. This is the one that's probably gotten the most attention. And here she's asked by the anchor, Dana Bash, about all of the flip-flopping that she's done. And here is her excuse.
How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and by extension the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions as an example. That value has not changed.
Okay, so let's review all the problems with this, or at least some of the major ones. First of all, Dana Bash gives her the question with multiple choice answers. So she asks her about the flip-flopping and then feeds her a couple of possible answers that she might give. And one of them is, is it just that you've learned more and so your policy, as you've grown and learned, you've changed your opinion. And that's about as good an excuse for flip-flopping as you're going to get. And so Kamala Harris could have said, well, yes, it's exactly that. You're 100% right. That's it. Listen, I've learned, I've grown, as I've gotten more information, I've changed, just like anyone. I've changed my view as I've gotten more information. She could have said that, but she doesn't. Instead, Kamala doesn't take the hint, does not accept the gift that's been given to her, and she goes off on a ramble about how her values haven't changed. She won't deny that her policies have changed. She says her values haven't. So, then if your values haven't, then why have your policies changed? Are you admitting to being an opportunist and a hypocrite? Isn't it better? It's one thing if your policies have changed in the same direction, right? Maybe you were liberal and they become more liberal. Well, then you can say, well, my values haven't changed. But when the policies flip, when it's the opposite of what it was before, and yet your values are exactly the same, well, all that tells us what you're admitting is that either before or now, you're full of it. You're being an opportunist. You're being a hypocrite. Then she goes off on the climate crisis. She says, and I quote, I wrote this down. She says, it's an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. So this is more patented Kamala word salad. As always, she continues to speak like an eighth grader, writing a book report and stretching to hit the word limit. You got to get to 2 pages and you're at 1 2/3 of a page. And so you just got to keep, it's too late to go back and use a bigger font or whatever. So deadlines around time, she says. Well, these are deadlines around, what else would the deadlines refer to? It's a deadline. It has to do with time. Of course, we don't need you to specify that.
Ja, Dylan Jessicus, u volgt ongetwijfeld de ontwikkelingen daar op de voet. Terecht dat mensen vandaag staken?
Ik snap die woede en die frustratie zeer goed. Er zijn nog ongelooflijk veel mensen gegijzeld. En gisteren, dit weekend, zijn 6 gegijzelden vermoord teruggevonden. En zoveel gezinnen, families die nog wel hoop hebben, maar niet weten hoe het verder gaat. Ik snap dit echt wel.
Ja, nu wordt er ook vanuit de Israëlische kant aangedrongen op toch echt een snel bestand met Hamas. Is de tijd gekomen?
Nou ja, ik denk, kijk, uiteindelijk, Hamas is een terreurorganisatie die bijna een jaar geleden, 7 oktober, op brute wijze zoveel mensen daar heeft afgeslacht, verkracht, wat ze daar allemaal hebben aangedaan. Dat zal denk ik heel lang duren voordat we dat ooit weer verwerkt hebben met.
After 9/11, Netanyahu could have freed all of those hostages on October 8th. The demand was release the 5, now roughly 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, including women and children. many of whom have been detained without charge. That's what we want back. But he didn't. And it was a callous indifference to the hostages. They were taken for that prisoner exchange. That's why they were taken. And we don't know. I've heard 40, I've heard more, but certainly the biggest killer of Israeli hostages has been the Israeli military and the Israeli Air Force, without question.
So, I mean, even on October 7th, we now find out that it was the Israeli army and the Air Force themselves that killed plenty of those people.
They did. And, you know, that's another failure of the U.S. press, because that was reported in the Israeli press, in Aretz, in 972, this left-wing magazine, and even the conservative paper Idiot Haranot. They all reported it. But is yet to appear, as far as I've seen, in the pages of the New York Times. Because they were flying blind. The resistance took out the electronic monitors. So for 7 or 8 hours, the Israelis did not know what was going on. They were sending up tanks and Apache helicopters and missiles, and any car that was going to Gaza, many of whom had hostages, they just blew up. And that was the other thing. I mean, having covered, it's War 101. They were going into these kibbutzes, and there were giant shell holes in the sides of these buildings, blackened buildings. Well, those could not have been caused by Hamas. Hamas had small arms. They never asked the question. You had twisted hunks of metal of vehicles that had obviously been obliterated by cruise missiles. It was never, and they still haven't. The American press, I mean, the Israeli press has done a better job of reporting it than the American press. So yeah, there were certainly, I mean, not denying that there were not, atrocities committed by Hamas. There were, but there was clearly a significant number of people, including bombing Erez, which is the crossing. They bombed their own central, because it had been taken over by Hamas, knowing that there were a large number of Israeli soldiers on the inside, and they were all killed.
Yeah, I mean, I do, because they always telegraph what they're going to do beforehand. And so they said we'll have another pandemic. So they're trying bird flu, monkeypox, any amount of fear they can for control. They want to pass the UN treaty and take control of our bodies and all the rest of it. And as bad as Trump was on COVID, he's been better on, saying you should have a right to not take the shots. And he was, against the lockdowns once we got into the middle of it. But yeah, I mean, so much of the inside info is just watching the establishment corporate media pre-program what's coming. But I was told last year by TSA and Border Patrol folks I talked to, they were told they were going to try to bring back a new pandemic and that whole hysteria. And so now they're trying it. The good news is people aren't buying into it. Again, NATO backed this incursion into Russia proper 12 days ago. That's insane. They're moving heavy weapons and sonic missiles up the border. I think that could be even a bigger trigger for World War III than Israel. So we've got twin threats going on there.
And so this is from Truth Out. Top Israeli official, quote, morally justified to starve 2 million to death in Gaza. I'm not making that up. I'll show you the video in a second. A top Israeli official suggested on Monday that he believes it is morally justified for Israel to wipe out Gaza's population through famine and starvation. In chilling statements that pro-Palestine advocates say openly indicate genocidal intent. You think? So let's listen. Well, I'll read it to you. So let me turn this down. I turn down my volume because I don't need to hear this guy. I'll read it to you what he says. He says, we are bringing in humanitarian aid. Hang on. I got to start again. He's going fast. We are bringing in humanitarian aid because we have to, he says. It is impossible in today's global reality to manage a war. No one in the world will allow us to starve to death 2 million citizens. Oh, chagrin. 2 million. That sounds very, what's the word I'm looking for? Holocausty. That sounds very Holocausty. Here we go. So they want to, he wants to starve 2 million people. Let's watch. Although it may be just and moral, to kill 2 million people. Okay. So, by the way, those are civilians. He's not talking about combatants. He's talking about women, babies, children, senior citizens, grandparents. That's what he's talking about. As long as they don't return our hostages, humanitarian for humanitarian, he says. That makes it moral. It is morally right, but there's nothing we can do. The world won't let us starve 2 million people. By the way, they pretty much are doing that. We live today in a space where international legitimacy is needed for this war. I don't think they have it. I don't think they've had international legitimacy for this war. So there he is. Isn't that nice?
In his 1920 article, Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people, Winston Churchill stated his belief that international Jews were seeking a worldwide communist state under Jewish domination. The international Jews would use communism and Zionism to accomplish this. As a first step towards establishing Israel, Hezekiah Niles described in Niles' Weekly Register article that the Rothschilds had purchased Jerusalem in 1829.
Rothschild helped found Israel, and Rothschild has always been the backer of Israel. Whatever Rothschild wants, he gets. It is believed that he is the richest man in the world, and I have little doubt of that.
In 1897, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, and was chaired by Theodor Herzl. Jewish delegates from across Europe agreed that Palestine should be given to them. Prior to his death in 1904, Herzl predicted that a world body will one day give Palestine to the Jews, and that he will go down in history as the father of the Jewish state. For Herzl's dream to come true, European military powers would have to be manipulated and used into taking Palestine away from the Ottomans by force. In the German newspaper Deutsche Zeitung, Herzl wrote, "The wealthy Jews rule the world. The fate of the governments lies in their hands. They start wars between countries, and when they wish, the governments make peace. When the wealthy Jews sing, the nations and their leaders dance along. And meanwhile, the Jews get richer.